Join us today on Beyond the Lair, where we have a conversation with Chris McLeod, a proud Métis consultant, leader, and Indigenous champion on the importance of authentic partnerships, due diligence, doing what is right for your community, and developing economic prosperity. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Lair. I'm Gina Jackson Montgomery. My traditional name is Cetacia, and I'm a proud member of the Seashell Nation. I would like to introduce to you my co-host.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dean Montgomery. I'm the co-host with Gina, of course, and I'm from the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, and it's great to be here today.
We are excited. We would like to introduce Chris McLeod, who is joining us from Ontario. He is a proud Métis and a consultant, investor, and mentor for Indigenous communities. He promotes the advancement of Indigenous people and industry proponents working together. This is going to be a very, very informative conversation today for both Indigenous communities developing partnerships, due diligence, the importance of contracts, shopping around, and questioning, is this the right solution for your community? Also, how important it is for social impact and what Chris has seen in his journey and his career. So welcome to our program, Chris. Maybe you could introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure, thank you. Tansei, Chris Nasiga-san. I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario. My family is from Saskatchewan, with connections to Mistawassa's First Nation, as well as Dene roots in Northwest Territories. And currently I live in Ontario. My elders always remind me to introduce my belly button connection. So I have two boys, Theo and Felix, who are 4 and 2, and my wife, Kate, who's from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. I have been working with Indigenous communities and even my own communities for probably about 25 years now. And the way that I got started in it was actually through a canoe expedition. And it was really interesting because right out of university, I was able to visit communities, probably 2 or 3 dozen communities, by retracing the fur trade routes of our ancestors from Thunder Bay, Ontario to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And we spent 3 months on the water, staying in each of these communities and learning a lot about the traditions, the relationships, and sharing a lot of interesting knowledge. And it took me down a path of really wanting to connect more with nations, to support some of the important things that are happening there, from education to economic development. And so some of the things I've been doing recently, I was just the CEO for Envision Insight Group, which was one of the larger Indigenous consulting firms based in Ottawa and also Iqaluit, and supporting a lot of Indigenous communities, businesses, and individuals through their growth of self-determination, whether that be about creating their own business or strategic planning related to governance and trying to move a community forward. Or just individuals who are looking to start their journey, because it hasn't been that long since many Indigenous people had the opportunity to participate in the economics of Canada. And so there's still a lot of fresh steps for people and communities to learn some of these skills. And it's been incredible, the things that have been accomplished already. And so it's really exciting to see how Indigenous people and communities and businesses are entering the world of economics, and also some of the things that they're bringing with them that are unique to the way of life and the ways of knowing of Indigenous communities, because it changes the relationships that they have and the ways that they want to do business, and also the impacts that they hope to have for themselves, their families, and their communities in general.
Excellent. Thank you. I know Dean and yourself have known each other for many, many years. Dean, maybe you can talk about how you and Chris met and ask some questions about authentic consultation, because I know that you spent a lot of time together.
Yeah, I think, Chris, where we first met, I don't know when, 2010 probably. So it has been a while now. And I think it was at a social impact forum, and you were presenting, and I think I did a presentation as well. And at that time, you were working with Right to Play, with promoting life skills in Aboriginal youth, which was an amazing program. And you invited me in to help, and we went and we toured BC for almost a month, I think, which was great, visiting communities. Maybe
It
you
was
want
a
to
long
talk,
time.
maybe you want to talk a little bit about that and your background there.
Sure. So the work I was doing with Right to Play was about the Promoting Life Skills in Aboriginal Youth program, which still exists in Canada, and it's about finding opportunities for youth through sport and recreation, and giving youth an opportunity to participate in after-school programs or sports-specific programs that build life skills that they'll be able to use in work and throughout their lives. And so it was an awesome time when we first met, because that's when that program was looking to expand westward. And at the time, most of that work had been done in Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba. And so the West was sort of a foreign entity to this program. And so you and I linked up, and we managed to go to a lot of different communities to introduce the program, but more importantly, to just ask questions of what are communities looking for, because as we'll talk about, when it comes to authentic consultation, it doesn't work well to enter a community with your idea. This is what we've come to pitch to you. It's more of a conversation to say, where are you going? What are your priorities? And how can we take this framework of what we're doing and mold it so that it's going to be able to help you achieve your goals? So it was really cool to do that, because we traveled all over the place and talked to a lot of chief and councils and dev officers, and just learned about what was going on. And communities always talk about how youth are their future. So many of these communities are seeing the needs, or they're seeing the growth of where they can go, and saying, we need this for our youth. Here's what we need to instill in those young people, the skills that we want them to have, so that they can be those champions and they can walk into this world with all the confidence that we want them to have. So it was really cool to do that. And I've had the opportunity to do that with multiple programs. It's part of that social license to operate, bringing in nonprofit programs that are community and culturally informed. And so there's many of them that are very good. And there's also a lot more now that are being offered by Indigenous people themselves who are starting these nonprofits, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, and I think that was a really, early stage when we were doing that, because we did it showed how industry could come in and support this, because I believe at that time, well, definitely it was Alltech that that gave us the funding to go around to the communities, as a great company that they are. And so that was the implementation stage. And then I think the results that you found from the community feedback, you took back to Right to Play. And I believe then there was another big funder that actually put that in. And if I'm not mistaken, that was Microsoft. And I think
it was Microsoft.
I think, you raised quite a lot of money for that. And I think it ran the program in 33 communities for a couple of years.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up Alltech, because I mean, things have changed a little bit over that time that we met, 2 or 3 years ago. But some of the social impact was newer, especially to large companies that have been looking to either create or work with Indigenous businesses, and that social piece to it wasn't always at the forefront. It was more about doing business. Come in, let's sign an agreement. We want to do something here. How can we help? But it's really changed into entering into communities or relationships preemptively, sometimes with the notion that there's going to be business down the road, and sometimes with the notion that we don't know, but this is the right thing to do because we work in these spaces and we want to help elevate Indigenous communities. And that's that whole piece of reconciliation, specifically economic reconciliation, that large companies have a role to play in helping Indigenous communities and businesses step into this space. And so it's really awesome to see companies like Alltech that are reevaluating their return on investment in a different way, and saying, like, we may not make money off this for 10, 15, 20 years or ever, but that's not the return that we're looking for. We're looking for a social benefit here, and we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, and I remember that. I think the social return on the investment from everyone, including Microsoft. I think the initial investment was in the millions, and it turned into almost tripled the social return on investment of what it was. So, yeah, pretty amazing results, and great that you measured it as well, right? That's really important.
Excellent. I also worked for Alltech, and I love that company. I have a question in respect of, and we always talk about this because you and we all have our own relationship, and you're one of the head facilitators for the Lair camps, which we'll get to at the end about social impact. But when industry does approach a community and talks about, they're all excited and they come in and they say, we've got this great opportunity, it's $20 million. We want to be your partner. We're going to develop educational programs and this and what have you. And they meet with, whether it's the decision makers on chief and council governance or ECDev Corps, and the nation gets really excited and they see opportunity right away and they want to sign on. What is the strategy for nations to do that in respect of due diligence? Because you don't want to sign with the first person that comes to the door. If it's a worthwhile project, of course, more people are going to be approaching you. But also on the industry side, what can industry do? And by industry, I mean proponents, developers, industry owners, whether it's wood fiber or BC Hydro or OPG or what have you, to go into communities and say, here's some due diligence that we've done that we can provide for you already. What are the important things that nations should ask questions when industry comes in with opportunities?
This is such an important question because more and more businesses want to build relationships and do business with communities. As Indigenous entrepreneurs and economic development corporations are finding more and more resources and becoming leaders in all kinds of industries, everyone wants to be a part of this. And, I'd say that the first word of caution is it's different across Canada. There's different opportunities, there's different capacity, there's different knowledge in communities. And so the first thing that I would say, and my favorite thing that I ever heard from an elder, she said, if you want to do business in our community, it will take 1,000 cups of tea. And it's such an important notion to understand that the relationship that you build, the trust, is not just something that we need now, but it's a historical piece to how we work together and created contracts in the past. Indigenous people did everything orally. And so a lot of our contracts were based on relationships of trust, of knowing who those people were, knowing that you could count on them to, fulfill their obligation. And so now when we're walking in to do that, a lot of businesses kind of skip that step. So I'll say on both sides. So the businesses that are entering communities or trying to work with Indigenous businesses sometimes they want to skip the step of building the relationship because they have work to do. That's their priority. And so the reminder there is it takes 1,000 cups of tea. You need to slow down, build that relationship so that the Indigenous partner is going to feel confident that you understand them, that you know what their goals and priorities are, and can do that work. The other side is that many Indigenous communities or economic development groups, etc., are still relatively new in some of these spaces, and we're very excited about that. But the challenge, like you said, is sometimes because of that, we take the right now partner, not the right partner. And so I've seen it in many different types of industries, from food security to research on fisheries, etc., where a partner comes into the community and says, this is the solution I'm going to provide. And the community says, that's exactly what we're looking for. You're hired. And then a year, 2 years down the road, they say, actually, this isn't what we were thinking. It's not working out well. And it's because maybe there was a lack of knowledge. Maybe it was the excitement. Maybe it was just the opportunity at the door. We didn't do the due diligence to create the relationship to really understand what product or service or partnership was coming in. And, we may now be in a contract that we can't change very easily. And so it's really important for both parties to remember that relationship piece, taking the time to understand it. And something I'll probably mention more than once is just Indigenous communities, businesses, and ECDev groups, whatever you might have, tend to think long term, right? We're thinking about what's going to be good for me 20 years from now. What's going to be good for my family 3 generations from now? What's going to be good for my community? So we're not always looking for the get rich quick or get something done immediately. We're looking for what's going to provide long-term value to the people that are important to me and the places and the community that's important to me. And how can I structure a partnership in that way? We see it a lot on the West Coast with 100-year trusts related to pipeline agreements. We also see it with entrepreneurs who are starting something, but they're starting it in a way where they're not looking for quick growth. They're looking for long lasting, deep entrenched growth that's going to be hard to get rid of. Something that's going to outlast them and be something that their children, their grandchildren get to be a part of. And I think that is slowly changing the way that proponents do business, because many of them come in with 3-5 year strategic plans, and the community or the business leader will say, we're working with 50, 100-year strategic plans here. We're looking that far, we're looking 7 generations ahead. So how are you going to meet us in the middle? How are you going to modify what you're doing so that it meets our community goals? And that's the 1,000 cups of tea. So I think that the due diligence is making sure that you understand the company that's coming in, but more importantly, as Indigenous people are entering that world of economics and entrepreneurship, is we need to push back and say, here's what's important to us. So yes, we are very excited to do this work, but we're going to tread carefully, because we want you to understand that if I live on reserve, I may not have the ability to raise capital or to take out a loan. So I need to be taking I need my accounts receivable to be within 30 days because I really depend on cash flow. And we need to educate businesses to think that way, so that when they approach us, they say, I understand the reality of how you do business, what your long-term goals are, and here's how I've modified what I'm going to do to meet your needs.
I think that's such a great point, because industry and companies don't realize that again, if you're working with nations, maybe some nations have that available cash flow for nation-owned companies, but particularly for entrepreneurs, where you're not getting paid for 90, sometimes 180 days, but you're still paying staff and you're still expected to perform at capacity and level. And there's just got to be a greater understanding, and it can't come after the fact. So I think that's really important as a community, as an ECDev Corp, as chief and counsel. If you have that portfolio, what are the kind of questions or due diligence that are really important from the very beginning that you can ask at a meeting?
I think a lot of it is a bit timeline based. Like, you're looking for consultation first. Let's meet with our community. If this is going to be a large community project, I know a number of nations have protocols in place. Some of them are government duty to consult, but a lot of nations also have their own traditional way of doing consultation. So make sure you follow those things, give your community, give your employees a chance to participate. That's usually the way that Indigenous people do business. It's not, I'm the leader and these are my employees. It's, we are a company. Let's all put some thought into this together. I think some of the other questions that you want to ask is around those long-term benefits, because if you have companies that are coming in and they're looking for 3, 5, 10-year partnerships, and then they don't really have a focus of what's coming next, that should be not a red flag, but an area of concern, because you're looking to bring something in that's going to last. And there's plenty of examples of partnerships that start 50-50 in some way, or starts, with the proponent owning 100% of something, and slowly it transfers to the business. And they provide education, they provide some social impact through that, because they're helping to make it last. I think some of it is around legal documents too. If you're going to be signing an agreement of any kind, you want to make sure that you understand the language that's going to be going into these contracts. You want to have an opportunity to help to craft that as well. Many proponents are used to doing this type of work with non-Indigenous business owners or communities, And so they have standard templates of things that they'll send out. Do your due diligence, read, understand what that is and what the impacts could be on your community or on your business in the long term. And it's part of it's learning that language too. That we always talk about it in the Bears Lair camps, learning the business, the language of business. Here's Indigenous culture, here's non-Indigenous culture, and here's business culture, right? Like we meet to business culture, but business culture it's a mesh of other cultures coming together. And so as Indigenous people who haven't been able to participate in economics of Canada for, a very long time, now that we have that opportunity, we don't just want to meet business culture. We want to make business culture reflect our values, reflect our goals. And so part of that is doing contract due diligence work. Part of that is educating your partner on the realities of what it's like to do business as an Indigenous company on and off reserve, what it's like to do business with Indigenous people that may have sometimes not conflicting priorities, but Indigenous companies value family time. We value traditional time, ceremony, things like that. So we need to put those into the conversations so that when we understand how we're going to work together, it's reflected there. And it's a shared understanding. And that's just a continuous thing to keep doing because it's going to always change and come up. And I think of one of the best examples of this is I used to do all of the Indigenous contracting with MyTax. And so it was all about research grants that would fund entrepreneurs, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and bring Indigenous researchers into businesses to help them innovate and do all kinds of cool things. And there's the very specific conflict of interest policies around who you could fund and how they could work together. And it became immediately apparent that when that started in an Indigenous community, all of the conflict of interests were happening because, there's people have relations or they were in this role and now they're in this role down the street. And so all these flags came up through the MyTax partner saying, well, we can't fund these things. Look how many conflict of interests there are. And basically we said, well, we need to destroy this policy because if we want to do business with an Indigenous community, help them innovate, help to fund those business startups that are doing all these incredible things, that's just the reality of that space. And so if we're following this policy that works everywhere else, it doesn't work here. So we needed to change the policy, throw the policy out or whatever. And that was a great example of learning because everybody was very like, what? We can't do that at first, but then very quickly realized this is important. We need to change how we do business here. And so it became a huge success.
Yeah, and that's so important. I know, last week, well, first of all, Indigenous communities are all unique, right? Some of very sophisticated business arms, others not as much that are developing. And businesses are the same way. So you're always creating that relationship. And I know last week, Gina and I had a meeting with a mentor of ours who has worked with many First Nations, and he works on very high level projects that are going on and that are complicated. And he's working with these nations that are very sophisticated. And one thing that he brought up to us was that he said that, it's interesting right now with the nations that I'm working with because they're actually giving more advice in creating JVs in equity stakes to industry because they've actually done more of them having the partnerships in order to get involved in what's happening in their land. So it's nice seeing that change in landscape. So it really is a two-way street and depending upon the relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing it. It's that, just like you said, that experience with JVs, with IBAs, all of those things where we had to push those priorities into the forefront. Now we're good at it.
No, and I think that's a great point because prior, I used to work as an ECDEV officer and Squamish is very forward thinking. But back in the past, we used to say to our proponents or partners, send us an MOU and then we'll get our lawyers to review it, or send us a JV or what have you, and we'll get our lawyers to mark it up. And then we would go back and forth. And Dean's right. When you get two sophisticated nations now, they say it's the opposite. So they're saying to the large, large companies, we'll send you an MOU, we'll send you our partnership agreement. I think it's also important because you can have somewhat of a vague partnership or MOU agreement, but Dean and I, again, when we used to work at Alltech, developed a Indigenous participation plan. And that is where you have an internal agreement between the proponent or partnership and the nation about all the different levels of social impact, not just employment and training, easy peasy, but really small business procurement, looking at the available opportunities for entrepreneurs within the nation, so creating economies within the community, but also the social impact of the community, which goes back to consultation, right? And I think if you were a proponent and if you were looking to have a partnership with community, what kind of questions would you tell our audience to ask for that initial consultation? What would be the important questions that a proponent can ask?
I think a lot of it is first understanding if it's with a community. I want to understand it might be that they have a strategic plan or something, but a community has a vision of where they're moving in the future. A lot of it is based around the topics of health, education, economy, and youth, primarily. And so when you're wanting to create a business, it's important to understand what the outcomes they're looking for in those 4 areas, because regardless of what you are, what kind of business you are entering into this partnership, you can have an impact on all 4 of those areas and more. And you can do that either, like you said, by doing something outside of your scope that is socially beneficial, or you can target your partnership to have outcomes related to those 4 things through the work that you do. So I think the first questions I want to ask is around those long-term goals of education, economics, health, and youth. How can we support those 4 things? And if the community has other large goals, and just listening to understand why those are important to the nation, why they've become a priority, and what's the timeline for this. Some communities are on a tighter timeline. They might have a large number of youth that are going to be coming up through high school and they need jobs. They need jobs in their community. How can you help us with that? We don't want them to graduate and either leave and go somewhere or just have nothing. So as a partner, I can probably help with that. I can provide some post-secondary education. I can create whatever work I'm doing. Maybe those youth can be a part of it. So I think that's the first thing, is trying to mirror the goals of the community. I would also ask a little bit about what they like to see. This is likely not the first time that this community is approached by a large company or a business in this area of work. So what didn't work in the past? What kind of relationships have been really successful with your community? Is this do you want to be a part of all the decision making? Is this something where what strengths do you have that we can lean on? What strengths do I have that we can lean on? I think that these are just mostly these are common questions in any relationship, but in business, sometimes they get pushed aside because we assume that there's a level of experience or expertise, mostly on the side of the proponent. And communities will often defer to that. We've heard of your company, we've done this, and we trust you inherently because of that. But more often than not, communities are now questioning that and saying, yes, we trust you to do that, but we want to have a say in how it plays out. We want to have decision-making authority. We want to make sure that it has this impact. So companies need to be okay with no longer saying, well, I'm so-and-so. I'm Deloitte, we'll use as an example. And you should know that I'm Deloitte, so I'm going to do a great job. Well, communities likely and hopefully right now are raising an eyebrow and saying, tell me more. What are your relationships been like with other communities? What impacts have you had in different places? So as a proponent, I need to be prepared to do that, not just showing that I'm an expert in what I do, but that I'm an expert in meeting the goals of a community. So if I am Deloitte in this scenario, then I might come with success stories. I might give you some points of contact in other communities, other Indigenous business owners that I work with. Call these people and meet with them. Come with us. We're gonna have an event. We're gonna have something where people can all get together and talk about this, because I think it's really important that as a company working in an Indigenous space, you open your doors. Transparency is so important, more than ever before. And that's just how community works. Like, you've worked with many communities. Transparency is everywhere, for better or for worse. But that's what communities expect of somebody coming in to work with them, or the trust is not going to be created.
I think as well, it's really important. And I would give this advice out to as many proponents and industry partners as possible, is to do a little bit of research before you walk in. I can't even tell you how many times that I've had meetings with chief and council or the ECDEV Corp where somebody has come in and said, so where is your territory exactly? Where does it go to? And what is the population of your community? And how many are under the age of 25? So knowing that you have this workforce that's coming up. So my advice is go on. There should be something that can give you some sort of talking point to where you can say, so I see that your membership is 4,100 people. How many are under the age of 25? And do you feel that there's a huge workforce that are coming up, or is most of the population elders that are aging out from the workforce, et cetera? So
one of the I can give a tip on that, because one thing I learned to do is, if you are working with any nation, we all have access to Google. You can set up a Google alert for that nation's name and their like alternative names. And anytime it's in the news or there's a new post or anything, Google will send you a notification and say, here's something about this community that's happening. And it's a great way to stay in touch with everything from something that's large and economic based, to a wildfire, to a community loss, or just something that's going on, a new partnership. And you get an alert and you can reach out to the people that you know and say, I just wanted to, say congratulations, or I wanted to know if I could help, or something like that. And it's a great way of keeping in touch, just with using some technology that can help you do that.
What is this? What is this
Google
thing you're talking about? Just
Google Alerts. You
Google
can set up your browser to do it if you use Google Chrome. So it will send you a notification whenever there's news about any specific thing. It doesn't have to be community, but I use it for that.
I think it's really, really important. That's a great tip, because Dean and I know this. Consistent communication on a regular basis, whether it's just a check-in and say hello. And Dean knows all about authentic consultation, and also involving in yourselves in community.
Yeah, one thing which is interesting is you mentioned the 1,000 cups of tea, right? Which is, I know you're a big tea drinker, but that's a long time for a lot of people. So, I mean, in your mind, when does the consultation start? What is your experience? Is it taken? Sometimes you'll just connect with a nation and have the understanding, and of course you have credibility, and so you've been around. So that's, but for new proponents that are approaching new nations, what is a time frame that is realistic in your mind?
Well, I guess it depends on the type of project, but a consultation could take anywhere from a couple of months if you're doing something informal and small, to it could take you several years. I know NAN, for example, in Northern Ontario here, part of their consultation process is that you have to do 3 rounds with their communities. The first is to talk about what it is you want to do, and then you give the community some time to think about it. The second time you go back, and they will have the opportunity to ask questions. Anyone in the community can ask questions of you, and then the community has some time to think about your answers to the questions. And then the third time you come back, and they can give you a response. And that can take longer, but NAN, for example, has 24, almost 36 communities as part of that tribal council. So if you're going to do some work and you want to do it with NAN, you might be doing a lot of traveling for a long time to do this consultation. And so it kind of depends on the scope of it. I would say, like you said, the informal consultation is the best, because we don't call it consultation. We call it just making friends and talking to people, showing up at community events. Go to, if the community has a powwow, show up, ask questions, shake hands, see what's going on. That's where business is done. It's not done when you sign a contract. It's done in the hours before that, where you built the relationship and you just became a familiar face. That checks in. And that's how the best consultation is done. And the best way of doing that is to not, it shouldn't be work. It should be meeting people and building that relationship. So it's more than just whatever you're trying to do for business.
Yeah, no, I agree. I know something my dad taught me at a young age, going to school when I was young. He said 80% of success in life is showing up.
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to touch on one thing for Indigenous entrepreneurs, because there's so many people now that are starting to create their own small businesses that are wandering into the economic space of owning a business for the first time. And it's scary because you're like, what the heck? I remember when I first started my businesses, I was like, I think this is mostly correct. And then, you'd wander into a new area and you'd be like, what's going on over here? So just learning as you go is part of being a business owner.
Tell us about it.
A responsibility that I'm going to project out to Indigenous entrepreneurs, that we had a lot of generations before us that couldn't participate in economics, that couldn't own their own businesses, that couldn't make money, that couldn't, take advantage of these opportunities. And so being a business owner is not just about, you creating something small that's a hobby or a fad and growing it into something. It's about resilience. It's about self-determination of saying Indigenous people are going to do this now. And if you are an entrepreneur, you have a little bit of a responsibility to lift your community with you, particularly if you're from a community that does not have a lot of economic opportunity. Maybe it's the luck of geography, or you don't have a lot of partners, or you're mostly dependent on government funding. When you become an entrepreneur, you're starting to stimulate that economy, which is stimulating your community. It's stimulating your families. It's bringing in money that is ideally becoming some disposable income for the people around you, as well as yourself, to lift you to a new space. And so there's a responsibility as an entrepreneur that you're not just doing this because you're interested in it, but you're actually bringing a lot of people with you. You're bringing the next generation who's going to come up and have all these opportunities. They can get a job in their community. They can start something new. They don't have to be dependent on government funding or something in the same way. And that's happening now. It's been 10, 15, 20 years that this is slowly happening, and it's picking up speed. Indigenous business is big. There's the talk of the $1 billion Indigenous economy. We are the Indigenous economy. We need to build it. We have that responsibility to do it. It's not just something we talk about. It's something we need to, and especially in the digital age, you can do things online. You don't have to leave your community. You could create a subscription site. You could do anything online, and money's coming into your community. You're using it to buy something from another small business. They're using it. And all of a sudden we start to have a bit more financial capacity that creates more opportunity, that creates healthier communities, that lifts people out of poverty, creates education. It starts to solve health, education, economics, and it gives your youth something to do in their future. So I'm just putting out that as an Indigenous opportunity or Indigenous entrepreneur, there's a really, I think, cool responsibility of where you're taking your community with you. That's
and
really
just for time's sake today, I won't going to get into it, but you've worked in a lot of northern communities, probably more than most. And I think one thing, which is always a challenge, is finding the opportunity for entrepreneurism. So I think if anybody wants to learn more about that they should reach out to you, and we'll give people a way to contact you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I know it's really important. I mean, we live, eat, and breathe entrepreneurism. We have a TV show. We have this podcast. We teach kids camps all over Canada. And I really want to end our conversation with talking about the importance of social impact within community and all of the great things that partnerships can do, and think out of the box, not just the typical employment and training, because you're hitting a demographic there. but where is the future going, and where are your dollars being utilized the wisest in community? Because we know across the country, 50% of all memberships nationwide are under the age of 25. So we have this huge youth population that are coming up. And is it important to support the youth as a proponent and a partner? Because we know this because you're one of the head facilitators for our business. So maybe you can talk a little more about that.
Yeah, quote, David Suzuki, he resoundingly was he was optimistic about everything that he did, but the one thing he said was he wished that instead of trying to educate adults and teachers and business people his whole career, he had just educated youth, because they became all of those people. And so I think that is that notion of focusing on youth is so important, because yes, we need to take care of our entire community, but we want our youth, our young people to enter a world where they have so many positive things available to them and decreased negative things available to them. And that takes generations, because, every generation heals a little bit more. But if we focus on the youth, and there was one chief that said to me, we spend so much money trying to fix broken people when we really need to prevent them from breaking in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so that was just, the leadership also understands that this is a priority. There's so much money. This is not just in Indigenous communities, but, in countries, we spend a lot of time trying to fix problems instead of preventing problems. And so young people are at a vulnerable stage, particularly when they're in high school, or whether they intend to finish high school. They're trying to figure out what they want to do. And so giving them as many opportunities to take an interest, a hobby, whatever it is, and turn it into a business, turn it into a job, turn it into a passion. Not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur, but that means we need entrepreneurs to create spaces where people can work if they don't want to be the entrepreneur. So I think when it comes to social impact, the creating those spaces, and many people over the past 5-10 years have asked me, I'm looking for an Indigenous company that does this. I can't find one. And I say, yeah, you're probably not going to, because that's a very niche, maybe it's making toilet paper or something like that. But you can help create one, because there's definitely somebody who would be interested in doing that. And so part of that economic reconciliation is focusing on social impact, because if we can create those opportunities for entrepreneurship, for resiliency in young people, it's going to help to create that Indigenous economy. And so some of it is just like the Right to Play program. You're helping kids just be kids, have fun, be in a safe spot, have caring adults around them. That's one of the most important things. Some communities struggle with that, but we can bring other Indigenous people to communities who are really supportive, caring adults that can help other adults, that can help youth, and can create new positive cycles in there. That requires funding. That means proponents to say, this is an important thing in this community. I'm going to help support that. And it needs to be long-term. Communities are not looking for parachute programs where it's like, one summer we tested this and it went really great. Now we'll go somewhere else and do it, test it over here. We need to build that long-term relationship. I know many nonprofits and also corporations that do things in communities, and they're scratching their head thinking, what's our exit plan? Well, you may never have an exit plan, or your exit plan may be to just have a lighter touch. But when you enter a community to do work like this, you should plan to never leave. And that's how you're going to have the best social impact and make the difference for young people, because you're invested. And that's partnership.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. What a great way to end a great conversation. Thank you so much, Chris McLeod. You are a rock star and just an amazing human all around. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so talented, Chris. You really are. And I know we joke a lot, but it is the truth. Right.
And Chris is one of the head facilitators for our Bears Lair Youth Dream Camps, and that is another way to get youth educated in community. So thank you so much, Chris. Such appreciated.
And how do we get a hold of Chris? How do our listeners get a hold of Chris?
Chris, how do we get a hold of you?
Well, that's a great question. My business cell phone is 778-888-2778. You can just send me a text or whatever, and I'm happy to advise people. Or you can send me an email at chris@northernstrategicpartners.com, and you can also get a hold of me there.
Excellent. So if anybody wants to get some more information, some consultation, some expertise, or has any questions that they want answered, please feel free to give Chris a call. Very nice of you to give your personal line and your email. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Lair. Please follow us, download this episode, and follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok.